parents only paid off my sister's student loans after we graduated Harvard together. But I did something that would expose my family's years of secrets. Before diving into the story, tell us in the comments where are you watching from. Enjoy the story. I remember the exact moment when I found out. It was 3 months after graduation. Julie and I were at our parents' house for Sunday dinner, a tradition we'd kept up even through the chaos of college. The table was set with Mom's good china, the ones with the little blue flowers around the edges that she only used for special occasions. Dad was carving the roast, the steam rising in tendrils, carrying that rich, homey smell that always reminded me of childhood. "We have some exciting news," Mom said, her eyes crinkling at the corners the way they did when she was truly happy. She looked at Julie, my twin sister, with such pride it made my chest ache. "We've paid off all of Julie's student loans as a graduation present." The fork I was holding clattered against my plate. Julie's eyes went wide, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise before she leapt up to hug our parents. I sat there, frozen, watching the scene unfold like I was behind glass. 4 years at Harvard, the same prestigious degree, the same sleepless nights, the same $200,000 in student debt hanging over our heads, except now Julie was free. And I was still drowning. But I didn't say anything. I smiled, raised my glass in a toast, and told Julie how happy I was for her. 'Cause that's what the good child does, right? The one who never rocks the boat. The one who swallows their feelings until they calcify somewhere deep inside. 22 years of being the twins who did everything together, and suddenly we weren't on equal footing anymore. You know, growing up as twins, Julie and I were always compared. It's inevitable, I guess. We shared a face, a birthday, and a bedroom for 18 years. But we weren't the identical kind, not in looks or personality. Julie was always the vibrant one, 5 minutes younger but somehow taking up twice as much space in a room. Her laughter was louder, her tears more dramatic, her dreams bigger. I was the planner, the steady one, the one who made sure we never missed a bus or a deadline. My parents called me their little adult from the time I was 10, which didn't feel like the compliment they thought it was. Harvard wasn't even my dream, not originally. I wanted Northwestern with its top-ranked journalism program. But when Julie set her sights on Harvard, our parents made it clear. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we both went? Wouldn't it be easier for everyone? So I adjusted my dreams, as I always did. And honestly, I loved Harvard once I got there. The history seeping from those old brick buildings, the energy of being surrounded by people whose minds worked in ways mine never could. I found my people there, my passions. I just wish they had been recognized as valuable as Julie's. When we were kids, Julie wanted to be a doctor. She announced it at 8 years old after watching some medical drama on TV, and my parents latched onto it like a prophecy. Every science fair project was a chance to explore medicine. Every good grade in biology was one step closer to that white coat. Meanwhile, I bounced between interests: writing, history, economics, eventually settling on political science with dreams of working in public policy. Not as glamorous as saving lives, perhaps, but I believed in it. I still do. At Harvard, Julie switched her major 3 times, eventually landing on psychology, not pre-med. I stayed the course with poli-sci, graduated with honors, landed a decent entry-level job at a think tank in D.C. By all accounts, I did everything right. But somehow, in my parents' eyes, Julie's journey was the more deserving one. "We've always known how much you value independence," Dad said later that night when I finally found the courage to ask why they hadn't offered the same to me. We were standing in the kitchen, me drying dishes as he washed them, an old routine from my childhood. Julie's always struggled more with responsibility. "We thought she needed the fresh start more than you did." His explanation felt like sandpaper against my skin. Being reliable had become my punishment. Being together had somehow only counted for my sister. Let me take you back a bit to understand why this hit so hard. Julie and I, we weren't just twins, we were partners. In elementary school, when kids teased her about her lisp, I was the one who stood up to them. In middle school, when I was too shy to try out for the debate team, she practically dragged me to sign-ups. We had our own language, our own jokes. We coordinated our college applications so we'd end up at the same place. Not because our parents pushed us, but because we couldn't imagine it any other way. Our freshman year at Harvard, we shared a cramped dorm room in Holworthy Hall. Julie plastered her side with posters of bands I'd never heard of, while my side remained nearly bare except for a corkboard of carefully color-coded schedules. We stayed up late quizzing each other for exams, split care packages from home, and defended each other fiercely to new friends. "You don't understand," Julie would say when someone questioned why I was so structured. "Her brain just works that way, and it's actually amazing." And I'd explain to my study groups why Julie's seemingly chaotic approach to assignments actually revealed a creative brilliance they were missing. But somewhere during sophomore year, things shifted. We moved to different houses, me to Adams, her to Lowell. Our friend groups diverged. She joined a sorority. I threw myself into student government. We still met for coffee every Sunday at Crema Cafe, still called each other first with big news, but we were becoming our own people. I was proud of that of us. I thought our parents were too. What I didn't see was how they were tracking our journeys differently. How every time Julie switched majors, there were long, supportive phone calls about finding her passion. How every time I aced another political theory course, there were brief congratulations followed by questions about how Julie was doing. The pattern was there, I just didn't want to see it. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this story so far, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything, and it helps more people find content like this. Plus, drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. I'd love to hear if you've experienced anything similar with your siblings. Now back to the story. Junior year was when the loans really started to weigh on me. Harvard's financial aid had covered about half our tuition, but the rest came from federal and private loans. Julie and I had the exact same package. We'd sit in the dining hall, calculating how many years it would take us to pay them off based on our expected starting salaries. Became a dark joke between us, who would be debt-free first? Who would have to delay buying a house, starting a family, living the life we wanted? We were in it together, this shared burden, a perverse kind of twin bond. "Maybe Mom and Dad will surprise us," Julie said once, stirring her coffee absently. "They've been saving since we were born." I shook my head. "They're comfortable, not wealthy. They've got their own retirement to think about. Always the practical one, that's me." What neither of us knew then was that our parents had indeed been saving, just not equally. Not for both of us. The summer before senior year, Julie and I both landed prestigious internships, her at a clinic in Boston, me in Washington with a senator's office. For the first time ever, we spent the summer apart. I sublet a tiny apartment in D.C. with 3 other interns, worked 60-hour weeks for barely minimum wage, and loved every minute of it. This was my future, I could feel it. The energy of being close to power, of working on policies that might actually help people. Julie, meanwhile, struggled. Her internship supervisor was demanding, the work more administrative than clinical. She called me crying at least once a week. Our parents drove to Boston twice to help her settle in, something they never offered to do for me in D.C. I tried not to let it bother me. Julie had always been more openly emotional, needed more support. I was fine on my own. That's what I kept telling myself. When we returned for senior year, something fundamental had changed between us. Julie threw herself into campus life with renewed vigor, as if trying to squeeze every last drop from the college experience. I focused on job applications, networking events, and my thesis. We still loved each other fiercely, but we were on diverging paths. Thought that was natural, healthy even. Graduation day was perfect, one of those rare May days in Cambridge when the air feels scrubbed clean and the sun casts everything in golden light. Julie and I stood together in our caps and gowns, crimson tassels swinging, as our parents snapped photo after photo. "The Goldman twins conquer Harvard," Dad kept saying, his voice thick with emotion. Mom couldn't stop crying. They took us to dinner at Harvest, ordered champagne, toasted our accomplishments. "We are equally proud of both of you," Mom said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I believed her then. 3 months later, at that Sunday dinner, I learned that equal pride didn't mean equal support. After the big revelation, I drove back to my apartment in a daze. The small one-bedroom I'd rented in a not-great part of town because it was all I could afford with my entry-level think tank salary and $1,100 monthly student loan payment. I sat on my second-hand couch in the dark, phone buzzing with excited texts from Julie about all the things she could do now without loan payments. How she could take the lower-paying clinic job she really wanted. How she might even be able to start saving for a condo. I wanted to hate her in that moment. It would have been easier. But how do you hate half of yourself? Julie didn't ask for this favoritism, didn't scheme for it. She was as blindsided as I was. When I didn't respond to her texts, she called, voice tentative. Are you okay? I had no idea they were planning this. I'm fine, I lied, the words bitter on my tongue. Really happy for you, Jules. It's not fair, she said quietly. I'm going to talk to them. Don't, I snapped, surprising both of us with my vehemence. Just don't make this a bigger deal than it is. 'Cause having her fight my battles would somehow make it worse. 'Cause part of me was afraid they'd tell her the truth, that they simply valued her more. But I couldn't sleep that night. Or the next. The unfairness of it all kept cycling through my mind, along with every instance of perceived favoritism I could recall from our childhood. The time Julie got a new bike after wrecking hers, while I kept my old one even though we got them together. The way Dad attended all her soccer games but made only half of my debate tournaments. The slightly bigger bedroom she got when we finally separated at 16. Had it always been this way, and I'd been too determined to see us as equals to notice? I didn't confront my parents again right away. Instead, I threw myself into work, stayed late at the office, volunteered for extra projects. If independence was what they thought I valued, I'd prove them right. I'd succeed so spectacularly they'd realize what a mistake they'd made in not investing in me the same way. Childish, perhaps, but anger makes us regress. Hey everyone! If you're finding this story relatable or interesting, please take a moment to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me bring more content like this to you. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. Have you ever felt overlooked in your family? Let me know, and now let's continue with the story. A month after the dinner revelation, I was working late when my phone rang. Mom, which was unusual, she normally texted first to see if I was available. Your father's had a heart attack, she said, her voice thin and stretched. He's stable, but they're keeping him overnight for observation. I left everything, drove the 4 hours to my parents' home through the night. Julie was already there when I arrived, eyes red-rimmed, looking smaller than I remembered. We hugged for a long time in the hospital hallway, all tension forgotten in the face of potential loss. Dad was okay, a minor attack, a warning rather than a catastrophe. As I sat beside his hospital bed, watching him sleep, his face pale against the white sheets, I was flooded with memories. Him teaching me to ride a bike, his strong hands steady on the seat until I found my balance. The proud look on his face when I won the state debate championship. The quiet conversations we'd have when he drove me to early morning activities, both of us natural early risers unlike Mom and Julie. He wasn't perfect, but he was my dad, and I loved him fiercely, complicated feelings and all. When he woke and saw me, his face lit up. There's my rock, he said hoarsely, reaching for my hand. Always showing up when needed. I swallowed hard, tears threatening. Of course I came, Dad. Later, when Julie went to find coffee, he motioned me closer. I need to explain about the loans, he said, his voice weak but determined. It wasn't what you think. I shook my head. You don't need to talk about this now. I do, he insisted. Your mother and I, we made a plan when you two were little. Half our savings for each of you. But then the market crashed in '08 and we lost a lot. We rebuilt, but there wasn't enough for both. We really thought you'd be fine. You've always been the stronger one. It was meant as a compliment, I know. but it landed like a burden. Being seen as strong meant being left to struggle. I didn't know how to tell him that strong people break too, just more quietly. "We were going to help you next," he continued, his eyes pleading for understanding. "We've been putting away a little each month. It would have taken another year or two, but then you'd be free too." I believed him. I think I did. But it didn't erase the hurt, the fundamental message that I was somehow less of a priority. Till, looking at him in that hospital bed, suddenly mortal, I couldn't bring myself to say any of that. Instead, I squeezed his hand and said, "It's okay, Dad. I understand." And part of me did. Parents aren't perfect. They make mistakes, have blind spots, especially with multiple children. The narrative they had created, Julie as the fragile one, me as the capable one, had dictated their decisions, sometimes at my expense. It wasn't malicious, just flawed like all human perspectives. When Dad came home from the hospital, things changed. I started visiting more often, helping around the house. Julie and I fell back into our old rhythms, the easy shorthand of siblings who know each other's thoughts before they're spoken. One afternoon, helping Mom sort through bills in the kitchen, I found the courage to really talk about it. "I wish you'd seen how much I was struggling too," I said quietly, not looking up from the stack of papers I was organizing. "I've always tried so hard to make things look easy." Mom's hands stilled. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice catching. "We didn't mean to put that on you. Being the strong one, it wasn't supposed to be a burden." "But it was," I said, finally meeting her eyes. "It is. Everyone assumes I can handle everything, so no one offers to help. Even when I'm drowning." She reached across the table, took my hands in hers. Her skin was softer than I remembered, thin over blue veins. "When had my mother gotten old?" "I'm sorry," she said, and I knew she meant it. "We should have seen that. It wasn't a solution. The loans were still there, a weight I carried alone. But being heard, really heard, eased something in me." Later that night, Julie found me on the back porch, staring at the stars. She sat beside me on the steps, shoulder to shoulder like when we were kids. "I talked to Mom and Dad," she said. "About the loans." I stiffened. "Julie." "No, listen," she interrupted. "I told them I want to split what they gave me. Half for your loans, half for mine. It's the only fair thing." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "You can't do that." "I can," she said firmly. "And I will. We started this together, we should finish it together." Her eyes, so like mine, were determined. "Unless your pride is going to get in the way." She knew me too well, knew exactly how to frame it so I couldn't refuse without seeming petty. For the first time since that Sunday dinner, I laughed, really laughed. "Well played, Jules. I learned from the best," she said, bumping my shoulder with hers. "So we're doing this?" I took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to refuse, to prove I could do it on my own. But wasn't that just another version of this strong one trap? Sometimes strength is accepting help, especially from those who love you most. "Okay," I said finally. "But I'm paying you back someday." She rolled her eyes. "Whatever helps you sleep at night, twin." That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, staring at the same ceiling I'd stared at for 18 years, I thought about the strange, complex architecture of family. How we build these roles for each other, the smart one, the pretty one, the responsible one, the creative one, and then expect each other to live inside them forever. How we can love each other fiercely and still cause pain. How forgiveness doesn't mean the hurt never happened, but that you choose connection anyway. I didn't know yet what sharing Julie's loan payoff would mean practically. I didn't know how my relationship with my parents would evolve, or if I'd ever fully shed the weight of being the strong one. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Like maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to carry everything alone. But I still had to figure out who I was beyond the roles I'd been assigned. Beyond the twin, beyond the responsible one, beyond the daughter who never complained. That journey was just beginning, and I had no roadmap to follow. only the understanding that I deserved more than I'd been allowing myself to receive. And the hope that my family, however imperfect, would be there as I discovered it. The solution with Julie seemed perfect on paper. Split the payoff money, reduce both our loans instead of eliminating just hers. But reality is rarely that simple, especially when it comes to family dynamics. When Julie announced her plan to our parents over dinner the following week, I watched their faces carefully. Mom looked relieved, maybe even a little ashamed that she hadn't thought of it herself. Dad looked hurt. "You don't think we would have taken care of your sister eventually?" he asked Julie, not even looking at me. There it was again, talking about me while I was sitting right there, as if my feelings were secondary. "It's not about that," Julie said, her voice gentle but firm. "It's about what's fair now. We graduated together, we should start our lives on equal footing." Later, Dad cornered me in the kitchen as I was loading the dishwasher. "You put her up to this, didn't you?" He wasn't angry exactly, but there was an edge to his voice I rarely heard. "No," I said, surprised by the accusation. "It was entirely her idea. I actually tried to talk her out of it." He sighed, leaning against the counter. "You've always been competitive with your sister." The plate in my hand nearly slipped. "What?" "Always trying to prove you're just as good as her. But you girls are different people with different strengths." "That's okay." He patted my shoulder. "You don't need to be like Julie." I stood there, speechless, the dishwasher door still open at my feet. All these years I'd thought the comparison worked the other way around, that Julie was the one being measured against my academic success, my reliability. But in my father's eyes, I was the one falling short, always trying to catch up to my vibrant, charming twin. It was like looking at our entire childhood through a warped mirror. All those times I'd worked twice as hard to get the same recognition, thinking I needed to prove myself, and he'd seen it as jealousy? Competition? "Dad," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt, "I've never wanted to be Julie. I've only ever wanted to be seen for who I am. To be valued for it." He looked genuinely confused. "Of course we value you. Enough to help me with my future? Or just enough to rely on me when you need something?" The words came out sharper than I intended, years of unspoken resentment suddenly finding voice. He flinched, and for a moment I regretted my outburst. But then his expression hardened. "You've always been so independent, so capable. We thought that's what you wanted, to make your own way." "I wanted to be asked," I said quietly. "I wanted to be offered the same support you gave Julie. Not because I couldn't do it on my own, but because you thought I deserved it too." We stood in silence for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. Finally, Dad nodded slowly. "I hear you," he said. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Crack in the facade, a glimpse of understanding. Julie's plan went forward despite Dad's initial resistance. She transferred half the money to my account, and just like that, my monthly loan payments became manageable rather than crushing. I could afford a slightly better apartment, occasionally go out with friends without calculating the cost in ramen dinners for the week. It was freedom of a sort. But the conversation with my father lingered, a splinter under my skin. 2 months after Julie and I worked out our loan arrangement, I got a job offer that changed everything. A prestigious think tank in New York wanted me as a policy analyst, with a salary nearly double what I was making in DC. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, challenging work, brilliant colleagues, a chance to make a real impact on issues I cared about deeply. I accepted immediately. New York was a revelation. The city's energy matched something in me I hadn't fully recognized, a hunger for more, for bigger, for deeper engagement with the world. My apartment was still small, still in a less fashionable neighborhood, but it had a rooftop where I could see the Manhattan skyline spread out like a promise. In the evenings, I'd sit up there with a glass of wine, watching the lights flicker on across the river, and feel something uncurling inside me. Space to breathe. Space to become. At work, I thrived. My boss, Vanessa, was tough but fair, pushing me to refine my ideas, to back up intuition with data, to think beyond conventional frameworks. For the first time, I wasn't being compared to anyone else. I was simply being evaluated on my own merits, my own contributions. It was intoxicating. "You have real potential," Vanessa told me after I presented a policy brief that had taken weeks of research. "The way you connect disparate ideas, find patterns others miss, that's rare." I almost cried right there in her office. After years of being seen primarily in relation to Julie, having my unique abilities recognized felt like someone had finally noticed I'd been speaking a different language all along. Hey everyone! If you're enjoying this video so far, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means so much and helps me create more content like this. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear if you've ever had to redefine yourself outside of family expectations. Now back to my story. New York also meant distance from my family. Sunday dinners became monthly video calls. Birthday celebrations required planning and travel. In some ways, the space was healing. I could build an identity separate from Julie's twin or the responsible one. I made new friends who knew nothing about my family history, who liked me for the person I was becoming rather than the role I'd always played. 6 months into my New York life, Julie called with news of her own. "I'm moving to Chicago," she announced, her voice bubbling with excitement. "The clinic I've been working with is opening a new branch there, and they want me to help lead it." "That's amazing, Jules," I said, genuinely happy for her. "When do you leave?" 3 weeks, she said. "It's all happening so fast. Mom's freaking out that both her babies will be gone." I laughed, but there was a twinge of something else beneath it. With both of us gone, who would our parents rely on? Who would check on them, help with the yard work, fix the Wi-Fi when it went down? These were the tasks that had always fallen to me when we lived closer. "Have you told them yet?" I asked. "Last night," Julie said. "Dad went all quiet, you know how he gets." Mom cried but said she was proud of me. I wondered, with a familiar ache, if they'd be as supportive if it had been me moving farther away for a job opportunity. But I pushed the thought aside. I was trying to let go of those comparisons, that constant measuring of affection and approval. "They'll be fine," I said, more to convince myself than her. "They've got friends, their church group. And it's not like we're moving to Mars." "True," Julie agreed. "But you know what this means, right? No more hiding behind me at family gatherings. You're going to have to deal with Aunt Meredith's invasive questions all on your own." I groaned dramatically. Maybe I should reconsider this whole independence thing. We laughed, falling back into the easy rhythm we'd had since childhood. Despite everything, Julie was still my person, the one who knew all my stories, who could reference a shared joke from 15 years ago and have me doubled over in seconds. "I miss you," she said suddenly, her voice soft. "New York looks good on you, but I miss having my twin within driving distance." "I miss you too," I admitted. No one else truly appreciates my color-coded calendar system. Or puts up with your terrible taste in music. Hey, Taylor Swift is a lyrical genius and I will die on that hill. We chatted for another hour about everything and nothing, her new apartment search, my latest work project, the disastrous date I'd been on the previous weekend with a guy who turned out to be obsessed with his cryptocurrency investments. It was easy, comfortable, the kind of conversation that leaves you feeling seen and known in the best possible way. After we hung up, I sat on my rooftop, thinking about how far we'd both come from that Sunday dinner revelation. The loans were still there, still a reality we both lived with, but they no longer felt like a symbol of unequal love or favored status. They were just another challenge in the complicated business of becoming adults. The next morning, I got an unexpected call from Mom. "Your father and I have been talking," she said without preamble. "We want to come visit you in New York. Just you before we go see Julie in Chicago. Would that be okay?" I was so surprised I nearly dropped my phone. In all the years Julie and I had lived apart, our parents had never suggested visiting one without the other. Of course, I said, trying to keep the shock from my voice. I'd love that. They arrived 2 weeks later, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. Dad had lost weight since his heart attack, his clothes hanging a bit loose on his frame. Mom's hair had more gray than I recalled. I showed them around my neighborhood, took them to my favorite local restaurant, gave them the grand tour of my tiny apartment with its majestic rooftop view. It's not much, I apologized, watching them take in the cramped living room with its second-hand furniture. But the location is great and... It's perfect, Mom interrupted, touching a framed photo of Julie and me at graduation. It suits you. Practical, but with a touch of beauty. She pointed to the small vase of fresh flowers on my coffee table, the vintage travel posters I'd hung on the walls. That evening, after a day of playing tourist, the obligatory trip to the Empire State Building, a walk through Central Park, we sat on my rooftop as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Dad had been quiet most of the day, letting Mom lead the conversations, but now he cleared his throat. I've been doing a lot of thinking since our talk in the kitchen, he said, his eyes on the distant skyline. About how we've treated you and Julie differently over the years. I tensed, bracing for another justification, another explanation of why their choices had been right all along. I was wrong, he said simply. We were wrong. Not just about the loans, but about a lot of things. I stared at him, speechless for the second time in our recent interactions. We put you in a box, he continued. The responsible one, the one we could always count on. And then we used that as an excuse not to give you the same support we gave Julie. It wasn't fair. Mom reached over to take my hand. We're so proud of you, she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Not because you're responsible or successful or any of those things, though you are all of them, but because of your heart, your strength, the way you love fiercely even when it's hard. Something tight in my chest began to loosen, a knot I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten it was there. Thank you, I whispered, my own vision blurring. Dad pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. This isn't everything, he said, handing it to me. But it's a start. We've been putting aside what we can. It should cover about a quarter of what you still owe. I looked at the check inside, the numbers swimming before my eyes. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the recognition. The acknowledgement that my struggles mattered too, that I deserved the same support they'd given my sister without question. You didn't have to do this, I said. We did, Dad replied firmly. And we should have done it sooner. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. We sat in silence for a long moment, the city lights twinkling around us, each lost in our own thoughts. Then Mom smiled, a mischievous glint in her eye that reminded me suddenly of Julie. Now, are you going to tell us about this man you've been seeing? The one you've conveniently failed to mention in our last 3 calls? I nearly choked on my wine. How did you? Julie might have mentioned something, Mom said innocently. Only that he's a professor at Columbia and apparently has, and I quote, annoyingly perfect hair. I groaned, making a mental note to kill my sister later. He's not a professor, he's an adjunct. And we've only been on 3 dates. 4, Dad corrected with a small smile. Unless that dinner at the Italian place didn't count? Julie is dead to me, I declared, but I was laughing. Felt good, this gentle teasing, free from the weight of all the things we'd left unsaid for so long. Later, after my parents had gone back to their hotel, I called Julie. They ambushed me about Michael, I said without greeting. Thanks a lot. She laughed. Sorry, not sorry. How's the visit going otherwise? I hesitated, trying to find the words to explain the shift that had occurred, the healing that had begun. They gave me money for my loans, I said finally. But more importantly, Dad apologized. Really apologized, not one of those sorry you feel that way non-apologies. Julie was quiet for a moment. That's huge, she said finally. I'm happy for you, sis. Really happy. It doesn't fix everything, I admitted. There's still a lot to unpack, years of patterns to break. But it feels like a beginning. The great thing about beginnings, Julie said softly, is all the possibilities they open up. She was right, as she often was about the emotional landscapes I sometimes struggled to navigate. This was a beginning not just with my parents but with myself. A chance to redefine who I was and what I wanted, free from the constraints of old expectations and assigned roles. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting often on identity, how much of who we are is shaped by how others see us and how much is intrinsic, immutable. For so long, I had defined myself in relation to Julie, to my parents, to the role I played in our family. The responsible one. The steady one. The one who never needed help. But New York was teaching me that identities can be fluid, that we contain multitudes beyond the labels assigned to us. I could be responsible and still take risks. I could be independent and still need support sometimes. I could love my sister without measuring myself against her. One Saturday morning, I woke early and took the subway to Brooklyn, to a small tattoo shop a colleague had recommended. For years, I'd thought about getting a tattoo but had always talked myself out of it. Too permanent. Too impulsive. Not something the responsible twin would do. But today felt different. I had a design in mind, simple, meaningful. The artist, a woman with bright blue hair and kind eyes, listened as I explained what I wanted, then sketched it quickly on transfer paper. A small semicolon on the inside of my wrist, a symbol I'd learned represented continuation, choosing to go on even when you could have stopped. "First tattoo?" she asked as she prepared her equipment. I nodded, nervousness mingling with anticipation. "You picked a good one," she said. "Small, meaningful. People overthink these things sometimes." The needle hurt less than I'd expected, a sharp sensation that quickly dulled to a manageable burn. 20 minutes later, it was done, a small, elegant punctuation mark that represented more than I could explain to a stranger. Walking home, I kept glancing at my wrist, at this permanent change I'd chosen for myself. It wasn't rebellion exactly. More like declaration. A reminder that my story was still being written, and I held the pen. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories/videos we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. The semicolon on my wrist became a touch point, a physical reminder of my journey whenever old doubts crept in. Which they did with frustrating regularity. Healing isn't linear after all. There were still moments when a casual comment from my parents about Julie's achievements would sting, when I'd catch myself falling into old patterns of comparison and resentment. But now I had tools to recognize those moments, to breathe through them, to choose a different response. 6 months after my parents' visit to New York, we all gathered in Chicago for Thanksgiving at Julie's new place. It was our first holiday with all 4 of us since the loan revelation, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. Old dynamics have a way of reasserting themselves in familiar contexts, especially around holidays with their freight of tradition and expectation. Julie had gone all out for the occasion, her apartment decorated with an autumnal explosion of gourds and fairy lights. She'd never been much of a cook, that had always been my territory, but she'd taken cooking classes in Chicago and was determined to handle the turkey herself. "You can be on pie duty," she told me when I arrived the day before Thanksgiving. "Your apple pie is still the only one worth eating." I laughed, touched by the compliment and the clear division of labor. Not competition, but complementary strengths. Deal. But I'm not cleaning up after your turkey disaster. So little faith, she sighed dramatically. Just wait. This bird is going to change your life. We fell easily into the rhythm of cooking together, moving around her kitchen with the synchronized grace of longtime dance partners. I made pie crust while she prepped the turkey, both of us sipping wine and catching up on the details of our lives that didn't make it into our weekly phone calls. "So, Michael with the perfect hair," she said, wagging her eyebrows suggestively. Getting serious? I felt my cheeks warm, not entirely from the wine. Maybe. He's meeting me here on Friday, actually. To see Chicago, obviously, not just to meet all of you. Julie squealed, abandoning her turkey to hug me. I knew it. You never bring guys to meet the family. It was true. My previous relationships had all been kept carefully separate from my family life, partly due to distance but mostly due to a deep-seated fear that any partner would inevitably prefer Julie once they met her. It had happened in high school twice and left scars I rarely acknowledged. He's different, I said simply. He sees me. Julie's eyes softened. The best ones do, she said. I can't wait to meet him. Mom and Dad arrived later that evening, laden with gifts and Dad's famous cranberry sauce, the one recipe he'd perfected over years of being an otherwise mediocre cook. As we helped them settle into Julie's guest room, I braced myself for the old patterns to emerge. For Mom to gravitate toward Julie, for Dad to rely on me for the practical matters while showering Julie with affection. But something had shifted. Mom asked about my work with genuine interest, listening intently as I explained the policy paper I was currently developing. Dad took me aside to show me the new meditation app he'd started using after his heart attack, something he'd mentioned to me on the phone but wanted to demonstrate in person. It's helping with my anxiety, he admitted, something he would never have confessed to me in the past. The doctor says stress was a big factor in my heart attack. I'm proud of you for sticking with it, I told him, genuinely moved by his vulnerability. That's not an easy thing to do. He looked at me thoughtfully. I had a good example, he said. You've always been disciplined about the things that matter to you. Compliment warmed me in a way that would have once made me suspicious. Was he just trying to make up for past favoritism? But I chose to take it at face value, to accept that perhaps he was seeing me more clearly now, appreciating qualities he'd previously taken for granted. Thanksgiving Day itself was as chaotic and wonderful as family holidays tend to be. Julie's turkey was, to everyone's surprise, actually delicious. My pies received the usual appreciation. We ate too much, laughed often, and managed to avoid any serious political discussions despite the increasingly polarized state of the country. After dinner, as Julie and Mom tackled the dishes, Julie insisting over my protests that I'd done enough with the pies, Dad and I took steaming mugs of coffee out to Julie's small balcony. The Chicago evening was cold but clear, the city lights spreading out below us like earthbound stars. Your mother and I have been talking, Dad said after a comfortable silence. We've decided to sell the house. I looked at him in surprise. The house? But you've lived there for 30 years. He nodded, his hands wrapped around his mug for warmth. It's too big for just the two of us now. Too many stairs for your mom's knees. We're thinking about one of those over 55 communities closer to the city. Wow, I said, trying to process the news. The house I'd grown up in, with its familiar creaks and the height marks penciled on the kitchen doorframe, would belong to strangers. That's a big change. Change is the only constant, right? Dad said with a small smile. You and Julie taught us that. Both of you, building these impressive lives in new cities, taking risks we never had the courage for. I was touched by his perspective, the way he was seeing our choices as inspirational rather than abandonment. The house holds a lot of memories, I said softly. Good ones, mostly. We'll keep those, Dad assured me. But there's another reason we want to downsize. He hesitated, then continued. We want to help you with the rest of your loans. Both of you equally this time. I stared at him, a complex wave of emotions washing over me. Gratitude, certainly, but also a lingering hurt that it had taken so long to reach this point of true equality. Dad, you don't have to. I know, he interrupted gently. We don't have to. We want to. You and Julie deserve to start your adult lives without that burden. We should have found a way to do this from the beginning. I thought about refusing, about insisting that I was fine, that I could manage on my own as I'd always believed I needed to. The old pattern beckoning. But then I thought about what I'd learned over the past year, that accepting help wasn't weakness, that interdependence could be as valuable as independence. Thank you, I said simply. That would mean a lot to me. Dad's eyes crinkled at the corners, the way they did when he was deeply pleased. You know, your whole life you've been so determined to handle everything yourself. Even as a little kid, it was always "I can do it" with you. Tying your shoes, climbing trees, doing your homework. Julie would ask for help if she got stuck on a math problem. You'd stay up half the night figuring it out on your own. I smiled at the memory. I was stubborn. Still are, Dad said with affection. But there's a difference between being capable and being alone. I think I finally understand that. And I'm sorry it took me so long. In that moment, on a cold Chicago balcony with the city humming below us, I felt a circle closing. Not perfectly, not completely, life is rarely so tidy. But enough that I could breathe fully, maybe for the first time in years. I love you, Dad, I said, the words coming easily now. I love you too, sweetheart. Always have, always will. The next day, Michael arrived as planned. I'd been nervous about introducing him to my family, but those nerves dissolved as I watched him charm my mother, discuss baseball statistics with my father, and make Julie laugh until she snorted wine through her nose. He fit, in a way I hadn't allowed myself to hope for. That evening, Julie suggested a walk along the lakeshore, just the two of us. The November air was biting, but bundled in our coats and scarves, we were comfortable enough. Lake Michigan stretched out beside us, vast and dark beneath the night sky. I like him, Julie said, linking her arm through mine. He looks at you like you hung the moon. I smiled, a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with my heavy coat. He's pretty great. And he clearly knows how lucky he is, Julie continued. That's important. You deserve someone who sees your value. Her words struck a chord, reminding me of all the times I'd felt invisible, overshadowed, less than. But now they didn't hurt. They felt like an acknowledgement of how far we'd both come. We both do, I said. Deserve that, I mean. Julie nodded, her gaze on the dark water. You know, I've been thinking a lot about our childhood lately. About how we were pitted against each other in some ways, even though no one meant for that to happen. The golden twin and the responsible twin, I said with a wry smile. Exactly. And it wasn't fair to either of us. She stopped walking, turning to face me directly. I need you to know something. I never saw you as less than me. Ever. In so many ways, I looked up to you, your focus, your determination, the way you always knew what you wanted. I felt like the scattered, directionless one by comparison. I stared at her, genuinely surprised. But you were always the one they doted on, the one they... Maybe, she interrupted gently. Or maybe they sensed I needed it more. That I was less secure in myself, less certain of my path. You always seemed so self-sufficient, so clear about who you were. I envied that. It was a perspective shift I hadn't considered. That what I had perceived as favoritism might have been, in their imperfect way, our parents trying to give each of us what they thought we needed. Julie, more external validation and support. Me, more independence and trust in my capabilities. Not that it excused the inequality of the loans or the years of feeling like my struggles weren't as important, but it offered a framework for understanding that was less about rejection and more about misguided love. We're going to do better, I said, partly to Julie but mostly to myself. Break these patterns, build something healthier. Already are, Julie said, linking her arm with mine again as we resumed walking. Look at us now, successful career women in different cities supporting each other from afar. Mom and Dad selling their house to help us both equally. You bringing home a hot professor. Adjunct, I corrected automatically, making her laugh. Whatever. Point is, we're writing a new story. All of us. Hey everyone! If you're enjoying this video, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement really helps these videos reach more people. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. Have you and your siblings found ways to break unhealthy family patterns? Let me know. Back in New York the following week, I sat at my desk, staring at my student loan account. With Julie's split of the original payoff, my parents' contribution from the house sale, and my own aggressive payments over the last year, the balance was down to a manageable number. Another 18 months and I would be free of it entirely. But the loans had become more than just a financial burden. They had been the catalyst for confronting deeper issues, for having difficult conversations that might otherwise have festered forever beneath the surface of our family's polite interactions. In a strange way, I was almost grateful for the inequity that had forced us to face these truths. 2 years to the day after that fateful Sunday dinner, I made the final payment on my student loans. I was 34, in a serious relationship with Michael, who had indeed become a full professor by then, and established in my career. Julie was thriving in Chicago, recently promoted to director of her clinic, dating a chef who made the most amazing risotto I'd ever tasted. Our parents had settled into their new, smaller home, using the proceeds from the house sale not just to help with our loans but to travel in ways they never had when we were growing up. Mom had discovered a passion for photography. Dad was taking a woodworking class. They seemed happier, lighter somehow, as if the resolution of the loan situation had freed them as much as it had me. For my loan payoff celebration, I didn't want a big party. Instead, I invited my parents and Julie and her chef boyfriend risotto to New York for a weekend. We had dinner at my favorite restaurant, took in a Broadway show, and spent a lazy Sunday afternoon in Central Park, enjoying the first truly warm day of spring. As we sat on a blanket, watching children fly kites against the blue sky, Mom reached over to touch the semicolon tattoo on my wrist, now nearly 2 years old and as meaningful as ever. "I never asked what this meant to you," she said. I looked at the small mark, thinking about all it had come to represent. "It's a reminder," I said, "that every story has a pause, but it doesn't have to be the end. That I get to decide how to continue." Mom nodded, her eyes wistful. "I wish we had done better by you," she said softly. "Been more attentive to what you needed, not just what we thought you needed." I covered her hand with mine. "You did your best," I said, and meant it. "And when you knew better, you did better. That's all any of us can do." Later that evening, after everyone had gone back to their hotels, Michael and I sat on my rooftop, the same one where I'd watched the city lights on my first nights in New York, where my parents and I had begun to heal our fractured relationship. "Penny for your thoughts," Michael said, his arm warm around my shoulders. I leaned into him, content in a way that still sometimes surprised me. "I was just thinking about family," I said. "How complicated it is. How we hurt each other without meaning to, love each other imperfectly, carry these patterns across generations. And yet you've managed to break some of those patterns," he observed. "That's no small thing." He was right. The journey from that Sunday dinner to now hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been setbacks, moments when old resentments flared, when I questioned whether true healing was possible. But here I was, debt-free not just financially but emotionally. No longer defined by comparisons to my twin, by the role I'd been assigned in our family dynamic. "The loans were never really about the money," I said, watching the last light fade from the sky. "They were about feeling valued equally. Seen for who I really was." Michael nodded. "And now?" I thought about it, about the complex tapestry of growth and reconciliation that had brought me to this moment. Now I know that my worth isn't determined by how others see me, even those who love me most. It's something I carry within myself. That realization had been the true graduation, not the one where I walked across a stage in a crimson gown, but the one where I finally understood that I was enough exactly as I was. Not Julie's twin, not the responsible one, not the strong one who never needed help. Just me, complete with flaws and strengths, dreams and fears. And that, perhaps, is the most important lesson in all of this. Families shape us for better and worse. They assign us roles that can become prisons if we let them. But we have the power to rewrite those stories, to step outside the boxes we've been placed in, to insist on being seen in our full complexity. It doesn't happen overnight. Takes courage to speak uncomfortable truths, to demand recognition, to accept help when pride tells you to go it alone. Takes forgiveness of others for their blind spots, of yourself for the times you accepted less than you deserved. And it takes love, the kind that persists through disappointment and misunderstanding, that believes in the possibility of growth. My journey with student loans became unexpectedly a journey to self. To understanding that equity isn't just about dollars and cents, but about recognition of fundamental worth. To learning that independence doesn't mean refusing connection, and that strength sometimes looks like vulnerability. If you're in the middle of your own version of this story, feeling unseen, undervalued, caught in patterns that no longer serve you, know that change is possible. Not easy, not quick, but possible. One conversation, one boundary, one act of self-definition at a time. As for me and Julie, we're still twins, still connected by bonds that go beyond blood to shared history and chosen love. But we're also individuals, walking our own paths, cheering each other on without comparison or competition. And that, more than any degree or job title or paid-off loan, feels like the real achievement. In the end, I finished the sentence that began this story. Parents only paid off my sister's student loans after we graduated Harvard together. But not with resentment or bitterness, but with hope. But I found my voice. But I broke the pattern. But I learned that my worth was never in question. And perhaps most importantly, but I forgave my parents for their blind spots, Julie for benefits she never asked for, myself for accepting limitations that were never really mine. 'Cause that's the thing about stories, we don't get to control how they begin, but we have a say in how they continue. The semicolon reminds me of that every day. This isn't an ending, just a pause. The rest is still waiting to be written. Thank you all so much for watching my story. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Your support means the world to me and helps these stories reach more people who might need to hear them. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or your own experiences with family dynamics. I read every comment and love connecting with you all. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't determined by anyone else's perception. It's inherent, immutable, and entirely yours.